Today we're going to go over my POWERU Nutrition system, and this here is for, we have mentioned or talked about this before in a previous lecture. I had mentioned this as basically a similar system to setting goals as far as SMART goals. I think everybody knows what SMART goals are, I came with this framework just because it kind of fit my brand and kind of what I was doing already. And you can use this as far as setting goals, whether it be for training or nutrition. I use it specifically for nutrition because I think it's a good framework of understanding how to make behavior change. And I'll kind of dive in a little bit deeper in what that means, because when most people think of nutrition, they think of just like food and macros and calories, and that is a piece of it. But there's always another side of it that I think is often not highlighted and is ignored a lot of times. And so this is basically my framework and how I approach it, how I teach it, whether it be general population, athlete. I think that this can work with just about anybody. So going into the acronym, P stands for prioritize. Basically what that means is when it comes to nutrition, what is the goal? Like priority. So like what are we prioritizing? What is it that you want? Why do you want it? And what do you feel like are the things that are necessarily holding you back from getting those things? So basically, this is where we are collecting initial data as far as like, what is the purpose of us going into whatever it is, the plan or coming up with a plan, how are we going to structure and come up with those things? The O is for organize. So now we want to take that information and how do we organize it and structure it into a plan or a direction that we want to go to get you to whatever outcome you're looking for. The W stands for win, and basically what are the KPIs? What are the key performance indicators? What are the things that we're going to be doing day to day, and how are we measuring that as far as monthly, bi-weekly, and then overall to get you to the place you're trying to go? And then E is enjoy. So I'm a firm believer in why would anybody want to do something that they don't enjoy, right? There's no enjoyment in it. There's nothing that you're getting out of it that you like. Why would you do that long term to get any result, right? So I'm a firm believer in humans are wired for pleasure, right? We are wired for instant gratification. And so if you're doing something and you're not getting any type of enjoyment out of it, it's a good chance that you're going to revert back to things that are pleasurable, which is why most people eat fast food, why they go out and drink, party, whatever the case may be, because there's some type of gratification that you're getting out of that in that moment, right? So how do we set this thing up for it to be somewhat enjoyable or that you're getting something out of it that is pleasurable? Next would be record. So how are we tracking things? Like what are the things that need to be tracked, right? Are we tracking calories? Are we tracking macros? Are we looking at food logs? If it's on the training side of things, is it stuff in the gym that we're looking at? Are we looking at sleep, right? So what are the things that we're looking at to help us move forward in getting you to that goal? And then this last piece, the U, I just added to that because I was like, okay, there's another piece of this puzzle, and upgrade basically means when do we get to a point that we move on, right? So when we hit that goal or we get to a certain place, when do we move on from that specific skill? When do we move on from that specific point in time, right? Where is it that we're gonna say, okay, we hit a specific period of time or a specific KPI, now what is the next step? What is the next goal? What is the next skill that you need to build to move to that goal, right? So when do we decide that you hit that specific goal? So that could be a time frame, right? So it could be, we're gonna do this specific thing for 4 weeks, and then we move on to the next piece, right? Or it could be, once you hit that goal, right, what is the next thing from that goal? So, clicker is jumping. Okay, so normally I will be doing this lecture in front of people, so I like to start this off. I've done this before. What would we consider this food to be healthy, right? Most people would say that broccoli is healthy. This would be a healthy food for a majority of people to eat. Obviously, some people don't have a good reaction when they eat broccoli. It makes them gassy or whatever. But in general, this would be considered a healthy food, right? Now, our next food would not be considered healthy food, right? And that doesn't mean that we shouldn't eat this food. It just means that this probably wouldn't be the best choice of food to have as far as being the majority of your diet, right? These types of foods shouldn't be the majority of your diet. I think for the most part, we consider this to be healthy food, unless you just don't like fish or you're allergic to it. But we would consider this meal for the majority of people to be a healthy choice of food. And then this taste is great, but again, this wouldn't be necessarily a good choice as far as us making a healthy choice of what to eat to improve our health and overall performance. And so the point of that I put that there is to say that knowledge is not necessarily the key factor in getting results, right? Because information is everywhere. We can find information online. You're watching this video, listening to this video. You're getting information right now, right? The point is the application of the information. So information plus application equals transformation. And so it's not necessarily a bad thing to have information, but as you can see, like if you go to a bookstore, social media, Google, we got all this AI stuff now. Information is everywhere. But for some reason, we're not getting healthier and people are not getting the results they want in the fitness and health space, right? And it's not because of information. It's because of us not knowing how to apply those things to life, right? And do it in a sustainable way. So we don't suffer from, I don't know why my thing's not working. We don't suffer from an application problem or an information problem. We suffer from not being able to apply that. So, the next question I would have is, what is the goal of all common diets, right? Because this is also another area where we have a lot of infighting. And what most people tend to fall prey to are fads, right? So whatever the hot thing is at the moment, right? So it could be, at one point it was carnivore, another point it was vegan, keto was a big thing. I think right now, a big thing right now is fasting. Everybody's talking about fasting or some form of intermittent fasting. And so the point is that majority of these diets, these diet frameworks, right? They're all trying to accomplish what you would call a calorie deficit, right, in some form or fashion. And the point of this is to say that there's not necessarily a better diet, right? So there's not one diet that's better than the next diet. It's more so of what fits what you're trying to do. What is your flavor of diet that you like, right? What works for you that's going to allow you to do something for a long period of time or build on that thing to get to that place where that's something that you can sustain, right? And so everybody doesn't respond well to a low carb diet or a keto diet. Everybody doesn't necessarily respond well to paleo. Everybody doesn't want to be paleo. And so the point is that it's not saying that if you're not a vegan, that somehow you're not that person that is more superior, right? No diet is better than the next, right? Because at the end of the day, what we're after is what is the result, right? What is me getting on this diet? What is the result of the diet? That's really the information that you need to be looking for, not necessarily somebody giving you some science that they have and saying that this diet is the superior diet because of X, Y, and Z. Because just because it's working for that person doesn't mean it's going to work for you. So it's just understanding that majority of the time, these diets are trying to accomplish that specific thing, and that a lot of the infighting is just more so trying to sell you that diet so you buy whatever and buy into it, or whatever that person is at that moment trying to sell. And so how I look at stuff, I look at diets as something that you go on and off of, right? So it's not necessarily I don't think it's necessarily something that is sustainable. When we use the word diet and culture, a lot of times it's more so of, I'm doing this specific thing for this amount of time, I'm after this specific goal, whether it promises me 20 pounds, or I lose 10 pounds of fat, or I can put on 20 pounds of muscle, whatever the case may be. I look at when I hear the word diet and how it's normally used in our culture, that's normally how it's used. I like to approach things from lifestyle. So when I see something or somebody's giving me some form of information, I always look at it from a standpoint of, is that sustainable and does that fit that person where that person is, right? So I wouldn't have somebody come into a gym and we sit down, or I talk to them on the phone and they say, hey, well, I eat twice a day. I eat lunch and then I have dinner. I have 2 or 3 kids, and majority of the time we're either eating something out of a box, or we're putting something in the oven or a microwave, something quick at night for dinner, or we're eating out fast food. I would never tell that person to, okay, well, now you need to get on a vegan diet and you need to be eating 4 times a day. That is a setup for that person to fail, right? Every time. There's probably a 99% chance that that person is not going to be able to do that for a long period of time. They may not even be able to do that just from the rip, right? So you can write out a whole plan. I used to do it. You write out a whole plan, you give it to them, and you're not meeting that person where they're at. And that's the point. We want to meet the person where they're at to take them where they need to go. So it is not to say that, hey, the vegan diet may work for them. You may get blood work done. You may show that that might be the best diet for you. How do we get you from that person that's eating twice a day, that's not necessarily cooking, to being able to follow that type of diet where you're making those foods at home, or you're preparing them in a way that's allowing you to then get the results you want? So it's just understanding like the differences. At least that's how I think of it in my own head, is that I think of it from a standpoint of how do I take this person, what they have going on, and get them to the place where they want to go. And a lot of times that's very hard for most people to wrap their minds around, because what we're sold a lot of times is that if you follow this specific thing, you're going to get this result. And it's no thought about, okay, well, how do I take that and use that for 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, to the point where it's so ingrained in me that it's basically something that is automatic. I don't have to think about. And that's how I like to approach things and think about things, because why are we doing this, right? And I think it's also another thing to understand that when it comes to nutrition, we tend to like to compartmentalize those things. So it's like, I work out from Monday through Friday, and then Saturday and Sunday is a dumpster fire. It's like, it's a whole different, it's like a 360 change. So it's like, you do all the right things Monday through Friday or Thursday, and then the last 3 days of the week, you fall apart. And majority of people are losing the results that they're after, or they're not getting where they want to go, because the weekends is literally ruining everything for you. So you may have your macros and all that stuff dialed in, and then it's like you get to the weekend and it's like you eat double that, and it's like you just threw away all the stuff you did the whole week. And so again, it's just understanding like, all right, where are you at currently, and where are you trying to go, and how do we piece that together to get you to that place? Not, I need to take this thing that you have, right, where you are, and I'm trying to basically force you to come over here and be this stuff, and you're not in that place to be that yet, or to be able to sustain that yet. So going into the system, prioritize your eating and fasting window. So just from a nutrition standpoint, this is just these are some very common fasting windows. There are a lot of different ways to approach this or look at this. This was just to give you some type of a framework to understand. The point here is that, again, going back to where is this person currently at, and what works well for them to get them to results. Some people get results eating twice a day, right? Based on what they're looking for to do and their lifestyle, that works for them. Some people eat 4 times a day and they have a snack, and that works for them. Some people fast in the morning and they eat throughout the rest of the day. That works great for them. So again, it's just understanding where you're at and understanding that there's no necessary right or wrong. It's what works well for you. And then marketing, what people fall a lot of prey to is that they believe certain taglines like breakfast is the most important meal. And there's no actual scientific research showing that that's the most important meal of the day, like it makes a huge difference from any other meal. I personally believe that if the person doesn't necessarily have a great relationship with food, and they don't necessarily make the best choices, I believe that unless you work overnight, if you're somebody that goes to bed at a normal time of night, you wake up in the morning, I don't think skipping breakfast is a good idea in that case, because 9 times out of 10, if you go a longer period of time and not eating, you're probably not going to make the best choices. And then if you work in an office somewhere where they bring in, I don't know, cookies and cakes and different stuff like that, it's a high probability that you're not going to make the best choices because you're hungry, right? And so one of the things when we go into, I believe it's the win piece, is understanding that we want to set ourselves up to win, right? So it's how do we put things in place for us to make the best choices, right? And I think that breakfast, skipping it is not necessarily the best idea in that case. It's not to say that fasting is wrong. Like I said, it just depends on the person. So the next piece of this priority part is understanding what I had said earlier is that what is the person after, right? So are you trying to improve performance, right? So that could be an athlete trying to improve performance in a sport. It could be you trying to improve just your overall performance and how you move around, right? You want to feel better. You want to be able to play with your kids. Maybe you do play a sport outside of here, a recreational sport. Maybe it's pickup basketball or something. And you just overall want to feel better, right? Is it a health goal, right? So are we trying to improve blood sugar? Are we trying to improve blood pressure? Are we just trying to have longevity or a long-term longevity, right? Are we just trying to improve that? And then the other piece, which is what most people are after, is body composition or some type of aesthetic goal. And so the point here with the triangle is just understanding that if we're going to choose one, it doesn't mean you can't have the other. It just means that it's never going to be at its max, right? So if you have a performance goal, you're not going to have the most ripped, aesthetically pleasing physique, right? Some people might have a very great physique and they perform very well, but the majority of people walking around won't be 4 or 5% body fat ripped, right? They won't look like that. And if you are chasing a performance goal, you're not going to have the greatest health ever, because part of performance is also trying to push to the next level, right? And so you're going to be leaving a little bit of that on the table, right? And so it's just understanding that you're going to fall somewhere on this spectrum, and it's like, where's that at? And that's going to also impact how you approach your nutrition and overall your training and fitness in general. So to go a little deeper into this, I created these hierarchies. There are obviously more pieces you can add to this, but this is just to give you a general sense of what goes into a specific goal. So hierarchy of fat loss, this would be aesthetics. This is what most people are after, some form of aesthetics. The foundation of it is going to be a calorie deficit, right? So calorie deficit and starving are two different things. Most people approach a calorie deficit as starving. They starve themselves, right? And so it's cutting a certain food out, it's not eating at all, and then there's no rhyme or reason or any form of tracking, so you don't even know how much you're actually consuming, and then there's no consistency or structure behind it. So it's just you starving yourself, right? It's no rhyme or reason. Calorie deficit is a strategic cut in calories, right? So you know how much you should be having, and your macros are set up in a way that's going to put you in a place where you're at least tracking to see where you need to make those changes. After that, we have protein intake. So what I've found is that protein intake, and I'll have to do a whole other thing on fiber. I think that's another important piece. But protein intake in itself, I've found that if the calories are in the right place and your protein is lined up in the right place, the other two don't matter as much as long as they fall in line with your overall calorie intake. It's going to more so depend on that person and how they're training and what they need. But you want your protein intake to be between 0.7 to 1 gram per pound of body weight. I found that to work. And if it's for, which I have another slide, if you're trying to build muscle, you want to make sure that you're getting protein in every 3 to 5 hours, just in general, just so that we're keeping protein synthesis high, right? Or they call it positive nitrogen balance. After that, another part to realize is that when you're in a calorie deficit, muscle costs is a lot of calories. And on a hierarchy scale, your body's priority is not you aesthetically looking well, so it's not you holding on to muscle, it's going to be survival. So those calories are going to be sent to other places first, like your organs, your heart, your brain, making sure that those things are functioning. So when you're in a deficit, meaning that you're not bringing in enough to sustain what you have going on, your body's going to naturally try to remove things that's not necessarily as important, which would be muscle, because it costs a lot of calories. So to try to hold on to that, you need the protein intake to be where it needs to be, but you also need to be doing some form of resistance training where you're stimulating those muscles, so it's sending a signal to your body to hold on to as much as it can. The other piece of this, or the other caveat to this, would be recovery, which is often ignored. So that's managing stress, sleep, and making sure that those things are prioritized, because a lot of times if you're not prioritizing those things, you're either setting yourself up to be sick, injured, or you're leaving some form of results on the table. And then the last piece would be some form of cardio. Just for a general standpoint, there's other forms of it, but it would be some form of zone 2 cardio or long steady state cardio, and you can do that anywhere between 4 to 6 days per week. Some people need less depending on how much you're trying to cut down. And it's anywhere between 30 to 45 minutes. You can go upwards to an hour of that. So just a general hierarchy of fat loss. The other flip side to this would be the hierarchy of building lean muscle. So the foundation here is going to be a slight calorie surplus, which is basically you bringing in more calories than you're burning now. And some people do this through what you would call dirty bulking, where they're just eating whatever they want as long as it fits their amount of calories they need, or they do some form of clean bulking where it's more nutrient-dense foods and they're more strategic about what they're eating so that they're not putting on more body fat. Because if you are dirty bulking, you're gonna have to cut more fat when you cut back down. So here, again, it's gonna be a strategic increase in calories. And then also let's make sure that you are prioritizing your protein windows because you wanna make sure that you're staying in a positive nitrogen balance. Protein intake, again, is relatively the same, 0.7 to 1 gram per pound of body weight. Depending on the person, some people may need more than others. And then we want to make sure we're doing some form of progressive resistance training so we're stimulating those muscles because we want to try to put on as much muscle mass as possible and as minimal amount of fat as possible. Again, we want to prioritize recovery, especially when it comes to putting on muscle because sleep is going to be where that's being built and a big chunk of your growth hormone is when you're in your deep sleep, so you want to make sure you're prioritizing that. Mobility, and then post-workout nutrition, and managing stress. And then for some people, they may need cardio. It would depend on where you're at and how much muscle you're trying to put on. And then do you tend to be somebody that puts on body fat easier? You want to prioritize some days of some form of cardio. Some need more than others. Next would be the O, so organize. So here I just say organize your kitchen, but pretty much it's just organizing your lifestyle, right? So if it's on the calendar, it happens. So basically what that means is that your first thing is plan, prepare, cook. So it's basically being proactive instead of reactive. And so a way to think about this is that you may not necessarily have to meal prep everything, but you understand and know when and where you're getting your food from. So you have restaurants, you know where you're going to get those from, you know what you're going to have. And what most people do when they do some form of a meal plan or meal prepping, what I see a lot of times is, and what I've learned when I only done one show, but when I did a show was, I have learned that most people track reactively. So they go into their app like MyFitnessPal or whatever, and they eat first and then they enter the stuff in and then they try to meet their macros as they enter stuff in. So by the end of the day, if I have, 20 grams of protein left, I try to find something that I can stuff in and add to hit my macros. What I learned is that true meal prepping and being proactive with it is that you enter those things into that app or whatever and you know exactly what you're gonna have in the portion sizes and all that. And then you can mix and match and make your meal plan. So that's just a strategy and that's how you stay proactive. Right? And so that goes back to that plan, prepare, cook, right? So you're staying on top of knowing what you're going to have beforehand. And that way now it's already in the app and you know what you're supposed to be having and you're not trying to figure out how to fit that into it. The next piece would be environment. So people adhere to the standard of the tribe. So what that means is that what most people tend to ignore when they're trying to make changes is unless you're like, I guess if you have a spouse or something like that, it obviously going to impact you more because that person you're dealing with pretty much every day. On a regular basis, you guys are kind of normally affecting each other in some way in your household. But most people don't realize that the work environment, the people you're around, whether it be family, affects how you eat and overall how you look at your health, right? That's normally where we get our standards from as far as health. So if you're in an environment that is not conducive to somebody that's trying to be healthier, right, or trying to lose weight or trying to be whatever, right, that the direction you're trying to go, it's going to be very, very hard for you to make those changes. So it's understanding that the environment is super powerful and that we tend to subscribe to whatever is going on in that environment, whether we're the leader or not, right? If it's 10 people in a group and one person's trying to do something different, it's going to be very hard to make that change, especially if you've been doing that for a very, very long time. If that's how the group's been doing it. I think we've seen that at work, at jobs, right? Somebody comes in and they're trying to change the culture, or it's a team, and they've been doing something for 30 years. It's going to be very hard to try to change that standard, right? So it's understanding that it takes an environment to help somebody change. And that's why gyms are powerful. I'm not trying to plug the gym, but that's why having a group or a place to come where it's basically conducive for what you're trying to do is super important. The next piece would be accountability. And I say this thing where accountability is for you, it's for that person, right? And what I mean by that is a person that hires a coach, right, or they have somebody they're working out with, or somebody that may be ahead of you on your journey, right? A lot of times we put the responsibility on them to check in on us, or to I guess in a sense you want them to care. And the point of having somebody that's holding you accountable is that's for you. You're checking in with them, right? If that person has to constantly chase you around and force you to do things, that's not accountability. That's called a parole officer, right? A parole officer basically is making that person come in and it's enforcing them to do certain things a certain way or to adhere to a certain standard. And nothing wrong with having somebody that's holding you accountable as far as making sure you're doing what you're supposed to do. But if that person has to constantly chase you around, that's not accountability at that point because you're not taking responsibility for yourself. So it's just realizing that the accountability part is for you, and it's also being truthful about what you're dealing with, right? Because nobody can help you or be there for you if you're not going to be honest about what's going on. And then the last piece, remove and minimize things you can control that go against who you're trying to become and what you're trying to do. So again, it's going back to that environment thing and plan, prepare, cook. It's just understanding that what is it in your environment, what is it that you have control over that you can work on and change now. And that comes down to the food, that comes down to being conscious about what you're doing, that comes down to tracking, right? That comes down to showing up to the gym or whatever it is that you say you're going to do. Our next piece is called Win the Day. So set your destination but focus on your trajectory. And this came from a book called Atomic Habits, which is a really good book. And so the premise of this, or what he tries to say is that a lot of times what we do is this image here is basically a plane is leaving from Los Angeles and it's supposed to go to New York. If the nose of the plane's trajectory shifts over 1% to up north, it's going to end up in Albany, New York. If it shifts south, it's going to end up in Delaware, right, by just 1%. And the point is that a lot of times when we decide that we're going to go after a goal, we focus strictly on the destination, so the goal. We don't focus on the trajectory, which is like having those KPIs and those points to show that we're moving in the right direction. And so we never truly know if we're pointing or going in the right direction because we're not tracking anything. We're not focusing on the day-to-day stuff and where we're trying to go. And then going back to, we all deal with setbacks, but in the long run, the quality of our lives often depend on the quality of our habits. So it's going back to understanding that what is your day-to-day habits, right? So it's understanding that things are going to come up, things are going to get in the way, but it's understanding that we want to focus on what are the daily things, what are the weekly things, what are the monthly things we're doing that are allowing us to continue to keep moving in that direction. And then we don't rise to the level of our goals, we fall to the level of our habits. So again, it's going back to what are your overall habits? And that's going back to this whole diet culture and understanding that you can do something for 60 days, right? And you're not consciously thinking about what that specific thing is doing for you or doing to you. And as soon as it ends, you revert right back to what you were already doing because it wasn't something that you focused on becoming or making it become something that was part of who you are and your identity. And your outcomes are a lagging measure of your habits. And what that means is that a lot of times when you're in the gym and you're working out, fitness is, and how I think of a lot of things, right? Relationships, finances, right? These things are investments, right? Your health is an investment. And 9 times out of 10, when you invest in something, you don't get a return right away. You have to wait for a specific amount of time. And fitness is no different. And what most people do is they get frustrated because it's like, I'm doing this, I'm doing that, and a lot of times it's because you're not tracking anything, you're not looking at anything, you're just kind of just doing stuff, and I'm not seeing anything that I want to see. And if you're doing the things and you're tracking, and you're measuring, and you're making sure that you're moving in that direction, you're going to see a result at some point, right? If you're adjusting and you're making sure that you're paying attention to what you're doing, the results will come. So it's just understanding that it's an investment, and investments don't normally give you a return right away. So who do you want to become? Every time you do something or don't do something, you're casting a vote of who you'll become. And so I'm gonna go over these two cycles. The first one is called what I like to call the perfection cycle or the dieting paradox, and this is what most people fall into. So they get a diet, which you would call some type of rules or rudimentary tasks where you have to do some specific things, right? And they start doing them, so they're excited, like New Year's, and so they're using a lot of willpower. They're motivated. And so they're doing the thing. A lot of times it's depriving them of stuff and it's restricting them so they can't do anything that they've been doing. It doesn't really fit. It hasn't taken into consideration anything that they have going on. And then eventually your biochemistry kicks in because now your body, you start fighting back, right? You start having cravings. You're just feeling deprived, right? You're not able to do any of the things that you like to do. And then what do? You end up reverting back to, because eventually your biochemistry is always going to win. You end up reverting back to that thing, and then there's some form of shame or guilt because it's like, dang, I did it again. I couldn't keep up, I couldn't do it, whatever, I'm sleeping in today. Whatever, I'm not going to the gym. I'll just do it on Monday. And you start falling back into that cycle, and basically that becomes its own cycle, and it gets a lot of strength behind it, and then the result of that is that you start losing confidence in yourself. And what do most people start doing after a couple times of doing that? They start making silent promises now. So now they start telling people about their goals because I done did this 10 times, and at this point I'm not trying to be embarrassed. Or they may mention it in a jokingly way where they're trying to get people to it's basically a pity party. It's like, well, you're going through this, too, I tried this, and it just turns into a cycle of you repeating that for years. And a lot of people go through this cycle for years and just doing this over and over and over and over again. And so what I've come up with, I call it the lifestyle cycle. And so what this is basically understanding why you want the specific result, what it is, and then where you're trying to go, what direction you're trying to go. And then it's setting things up in a way where you have control over that, right? And so we have this we have this thing called the self-determination theory. And one of the pieces of the self-determination theory is autonomy, and it's just understanding that it's basically giving you control over your goal or whatever the thing may be. It's giving you that power of understanding that you have choice and you are able to make decisions. So basically, you're being put in the driver's seat, and you're not being forced to do things that may not necessarily be conducive for where you're at or where you're trying to go, right? And then we're setting ourselves up to have good habits. Those habits over time build up and build power. And going back to that casting vote for who you want to be, right? Every time you're doing something that's basically conducive to who you're trying to become, you basically increase confidence, right? Because I believe that self-confidence is basically you keeping the promises you make to yourself. So if you're doing those things on a day-to-day basis, on a week-to-week basis, over time you build up confidence, you build up integrity in yourself, and you feel like, okay, I'm proving to myself I can follow through. That over time builds up, and then you start seeing improvement, right? Because now your confidence is up, and now you start seeing, okay, I want to see what else I can do. You start adding to that. And so that's just my belief system behind it and how to kind of get out of that other cycle. So going back to self-esteem bank account, basically it's going back to the idea that my self-esteem improves every time I do things that are conducive to the person I want to become. Every time I don't do things conducive to the person I want to become, I'm basically withdrawing from that bank account. So focus on small wins. Going back to, I think I said this a little earlier, people don't transform by feeling bad. So going back to that idea of we are not going to do things that we consider painful, right? Or that are unenjoyable for a long time, right? We're going to shy away from that. We're going to go try to do something else. So it's understanding that there has to be some form of enjoyment and some form of understanding that this is benefiting me in some way, right? Besides me just showing up because I think I'm supposed to do that because I'm supposed to be healthy, right? It has to be something bigger than that. And then we mistake aspirations for behaviors. So that's the idea of, this example is getting more sleep versus scheduling like an actual nighttime routine. But another way to think about this is a lot of people have done this, it's called aspiration shopping. So we say, I'm gonna start eating healthy. So we get up, we go to the grocery store on a Saturday, Sunday, and we buy a bunch of vegetables, a bunch of fruits, and all kinds of stuff, but we don't have any plan of how we're going to actually eat those things throughout the week. So we get home, we don't take any of the stuff out of the packages, we don't cut nothing up, we just put it in the refrigerator, and then half the stuff goes bad, right? And we're wasting money. And so it's understanding that an aspiration is great, right? Because you want something, you want to go somewhere, but it's like, what are the actual behaviors, right? What are the things that I have to do to make sure that aspiration becomes an outcome? So some other forms of behaviors, training, right? So showing up and actually doing your training, having a actual nighttime routine for you to get better sleep, going to the grocery store and having an actual list and plan of what you're going to do, preparing your food or knowing where you're going to get your food from, actually eating those meals that you plan, because I think that we've all done that as well, where you prep stuff and then you don't even eat the stuff, and then checking in with an accountability person. And I don't remember where I got this, where I had read this study from. I think I learned this from another trainer. I think it was from another trainer. He had went through a bunch of old client portfolios. Like he would actually manually track them. This was a long time ago. And he was going through their files, and what he had learned was that people that actually write down their meals, so now we have apps and stuff, but at that time, people that were actually writing down their meals, and they had somebody that they reported to, had a 60% higher ratio of actually getting results and following through. So most of the time when we're accountable to somebody else, we tend to do what we're supposed to do compared to when we're just left to our own device. Especially if it's somebody that is like ahead of us or that we consider to be an expert or better than us at that thing, and we want that specific thing. So I have posted this guide. I want to say this was back in like February. You could probably find this on Instagram. It should still be up there. And the guide is just basically showing lists of foods, different foods that are considered healthy foods. Spices, grains, fruits, beans, beverages, and the whole point here is that you want to try to find foods that you enjoy, right? So I'm another believer in that if you have something that you specifically like, so if you like burgers, right? Buy your own ground beef, make your own burger, right? Make it at home. It's slightly better than what you're currently probably doing buying from a fast food restaurant, right? So it's upgrading it and making it slightly better. It doesn't mean that burgers is the best choice, but it's better than what you're doing, right? So it's making things slightly better and building on that. So the R, record your progress. We manage what we monitor. So tracking, how are we tracking? In some form or fashion, how are we doing that? I'm a firm believer in doing it through figuring out calories and macros, because I think that one, it builds awareness of like actual macros and what they are. A lot of people don't really know about calories and macros. They think they do. A lot of people overestimate what they're actually doing. So they may feel like they're doing something a certain way and they're actually not. And then a big downfall for a lot of people is they may have lost weight in the past, and what they did worked at that time and it's not working now. And it could be that you did some form of crash dieting, you did lose a bunch of weight, and now your metabolism is in a different place, and so you're not responding the same way to that. And so you think that, oh, well, I do eat healthy, I do this, but it may not have been necessarily the right thing for you to do, and that's why it's not working now. So I believe in trying first and foremost to determine what your maintenance calories are. So where are you at right now, and how much are you consuming? What does it look like? What is the overall picture of what you're doing? So I believe in tracking foods for anywhere between 2 to 4 weeks. You can use MyFitnessPal. There's something called Lose It, and then I just found another one called Macros. I think it's called Macros Inc. And I just started using that one. So those are some very good ones. And then on top of that, if you have some form of a weight goal or weight loss goal or fat loss goal, you want to make sure you're tracking some form of body composition. So you're either taking weight at least 3 times out of the week. So I would say 2 times during the week and then 1 time on the weekend. and then we want to take the average of that, right? And we want to see what that looks like over the course of a couple weeks, right? Are you moving in the right direction? Is it staying in the same place, or are you gaining weight? And then you can do progress pictures or some type of body composition measurements like body fat or circumferences. And then this other thing called biofeedbacks, which I call shreds. So we're looking at sleep metrics, all right? So how's your sleep? How many hours of sleep are you getting? And I think that's very good to track, especially in the beginning, because you can kind of see your patterns, right? Do you tend to be exhausted on Wednesdays? Do you go out on Fridays and you don't get much sleep on Saturday? How are you on Monday morning? What does your energy levels look like? And you can kind of start seeing your patterns. How are your hunger signals? Do you tend to get really hungry in the middle of the day? Do you tend to not be hungry at all, right? Is your appetite really just kind of suppressed to the point where you're not eating much at all? I've also seen that as well. A lot of people undereat, right? So they're not eating really much at all, and then they have moments where they go in and they binge eat. Recovery, how well are you recovering, right? So one simple way you can track recovery is you can look at your heart rate in the morning. So if you get a baseline of what your normal resting heart rate is, let's say it's 60 beats per minute. If you wake up after an intense day of training the day before and it's 10 to 15 beats higher, it's a good chance your body hasn't recovered all the way. Another one is heart rate variability. You can do that through an tracking app, and it's just kind of looking at where your nervous system is at that moment, right? So are you in more of a stress state, or are you in more of a rest and digestive state, right? So how are you recovering? Energy levels, again, going back, how are you feeling overall? What is your energy like throughout the day? Digestion, so do you tend to be bloating and gassy? How does your poop look, right? So that's something to look at. That's information. I know it sounds gross, but that's information. Do you have food in your poop? Does it float? Does it go straight down to the bowl? Is it painful, right? Is it a very, very bad vulgar smell, right? What color is it? And then stress. Stress is probably the big deal breaker of them all, right? So how are you managing stress? And so how I like to equate stress a lot of times to most people is, and I equate stress and sleep kind of very similar, because if you're not sleeping, your body's in a stressful state. So if I have a tub, right, and I have this tub, and I turn the faucet on, or the tub on, and I'm filling it up with water, right? And the water is basically, I'm following the nutrition plan, I'm training, I'm taking my supplements, I'm doing mobility, right? So you're doing all this good stuff, you're filling it up. Stress and sleep, basically, if that's not on point, is you walk to the side of that tub and you're poking big holes on the side of it, and it's just leaking out. And you're like, I don't get why I can't get to this place with my results. Like, I'm doing all this stuff, and then we're not looking at the other piece of the puzzle, which is the sleep and stress is basically wasting away a lot of that stuff good stuff you're putting in. So we have to patch that up and fix those things in order to get the max out of the results that we're looking for. So tracking, going back to other forms of tracking, because some people don't like to necessarily, they don't want to track macros, which is fine if you don't want to do that. But I still think you need to be aware of what you're doing in some form of fashion. So it could be going old school and getting an actual journal and logging in there. They still sell those things. You can get them off Amazon. Or just a simple journal. You're writing down what you had and the portions. And basically, the point of tracking, not just to see numbers, but we want to see patterns, right? Because I personally feel like most people, going back to what I said earlier, right? When you become aware of your diet and you actually start following, you put some structure around it, get results, right? They tend to get some form of results. It may not be the best results, but they tend to get results because they're becoming aware of what they're doing. I heard something that said awareness precedes change, assessment precedes awareness, right? And so this is our way of assessing those things. And then the other form you can do it is just simply taking pictures, and you can send that to a coach, or you can post. You can make a private Instagram account where you just put your food on there, and it's just a log. And you can look back and see exactly what it is that you're doing. Because you may not realize it. You may be like, oh wow, I didn't realize that I was eating out that many times a week, or I was actually eating that much, right? I didn't realize that I was actually doing that, because you get so accustomed to your routine. So kind of going a little bit deeper into the little nitty gritty stuff. So once we determine that first piece, if we're tracking it in the app, we figure out what our total daily energy expenditure is, and which would be called TDE, and then we figure out how much we're actually taking in, right? So how much are you burning, right? And then versus how much are you taking, how much food are you bringing in, right? You do that through tracking it through an app, right? So you're tracking your food. And obviously these apps aren't super accurate because it never could be. You'd have to actually go to a lab and like figure out how much you're actually burning and how much you're actually taking in and stuff. But it's just to understand, to get you some type of data to understand. So you're entering those things in and you figure out, you get a baseline of one, what are your patterns, and then how much are you actually taking in and how much are you burning. Another form of tracking, this is something that I did a couple years ago. I just did this on an Excel sheet. You're tracking your weight, so you can do this on apps too, but you put your weight in. So I was doing it at least 4 times a week. And then I had the algorithm where it was basically taking my weekly averages, and if you can see on the screen, my averages were going down. So that tells me that what I was doing was working because it's moving in the right direction. And this goes back to what I was saying about dieting, right? A lot of times we marry a diet, right? We say, this is the diet. Vegan, paleo, keto, whatever. This has to be the right diet because of whatever we were told, or we just wholeheartedly believe that because of something we read. I don't know. But what are the results of the diet, right? So if my goal is weight loss and my goal is fat loss, and I'm doing this diet and I'm not losing weight and it's not going in the right direction, something's not working. And that should be the determining factor of what you do or don't do. Not based off of some information you were given. And like I said before, just because something worked for somebody else doesn't mean it's going to work for you. So next, we determine what our total calories, like what we need. We can do this. You don't have to actually follow these formulas or write these formulas out and calculate it. You can do it if you want. You want to nerd out. You can literally look these up on Google and you can just enter your information in and it'll spit the number out for you. These are 2 very popular ones to figure that out. So Harris and Benedict is one, and then Ketchum and Cardle. You would have to have, I think you have to have your body fat taken. I'll use this one in the gym a lot of times with clients. I'll take body fat percentages, and then I have an actual algorithm thing that I created, and I'll put the numbers in and it'll spit out the information I need. From there, they have something called the activity factor. So once you figure out what that number is, that specific number is, based off your activity factor, you'll take that number and multiply it by wherever you fall in on this list, and then that will give you what your predicted total calories should be. Once you have your total calories or what you need, you determine whether you'll go into a calorie deficit or if you need to be in a calorie surplus. And if you're in a calorie deficit, you take that, whatever that number is after you add the activity factor, and you subtract anywhere between, it could be 100 calories to 500 calories, depending on how big of a deficit you want. Or if it's a surplus, it could be 100 calories more to 500 calories more to 750 calories more. It just depends on how big of a deficit or how big of a surplus you want to go into. And that would be determined on how much that person needs to lose, what's the time frame, and how aggressive they want to be with their diet. So from there, we want to set up macros, okay? So going back to what I said before, to me, protein is the most important part. So the first piece of it is going to be 1 gram per pound of body weight. This is just to keep it simple, but it can be 0.7 to 1 gram per pound of body weight. Depending on the person, if they're very, very overweight, we want to kind of bring that number down some to where their goal weight would be, right? So if they're 300, 400 pounds, we're not going to set up 1 gram per pound of body weight being their protein intake. That's an extreme amount of protein. It's way too much. So we want to kind of go more toward their goal weight, or we'll do a percentage of those calories, which should be around 30% of those calories. From there, once we have our protein intake, we want to figure out, using the remaining calories that we have left, we want to determine the fat intake. You want your fat intake to be at least 10% of total calories, because when you start dropping below that, you can start having some type of hormonal issues, because we need body fat for our sex hormones and we need cholesterol. So it's super important. You don't want to drop below that. I found that around 30% of the remaining calories is normally a good place for most people. And then the remaining calories you have left after you determine the protein and the fats will go to the carbohydrates. So an example of this would be, I have a 200-pound person whose maintenance calories is 2,000 calories. So if I did 1 gram per pound of body weight, they would need 200 grams of protein. That is 800 calories, so the remaining amount of calories we have left are 1,200 calories. If I set their fat intake to be 30% of those remaining calories, that would be 40 grams of fat, and that would be 360 calories. From there, we would take the remaining calories, which is 840 calories, and that would be 210 grams of carbohydrates. Most people think that that's a lot of carbohydrates. It's not. The average person that is just out here, like, just following a standard American diet, they're consuming anywhere between 350 to 500 grams of carbohydrates per day. So just think about that. So that's fairly low. And if it's solid carbohydrates and it's not coming from processed foods, majority of processed foods, it's minimally processed, that's not high at all. And if you're training very hard, that you're gonna want those carbohydrates. So this last piece, kind of close up, I want to give a little bit of motivation. So first is put yourself first. So being selfish isn't the same as putting yourself first. You can't give what you don't have inside. So what that just means is that a lot of times we get a satisfaction out of sacrificing ourselves for other people. But I think I have put this, I don't know if I put this quote online, but it said, you're willing to die for your family, right? So you're willing to do whatever it takes, you'll die for your family. But are you willing to get healthy for your family, right? And we don't normally prioritize our health until something's wrong. That seems to be like a human condition for us. And I think that it goes back to the idea that it's something that we get for free. Majority of people's health is given to them for free. Most people are born healthy. They don't really have any crazy ailments. And we don't really start thinking about our health as being a priority until something goes wrong or we're older. And a lot of people that get older say, well, it's because I'm 40, it's because I'm 50, it's because I'm 60. It's like, no, it's because you've been doing this thing for 30 years, this specific way. You've been eating like this, you've been not exercising or anything. And it doesn't mean that you don't have things come up or things wrong, or that you're doing the same stuff you did in your 20s, but your health was never really a priority until something happened or until you got older and now you're achy and things hurt, right? Then you start prioritizing it. And that's what I've realized with people when it comes to a lot of things. We take the things that we get for free for granted, right? Family, right? We take it for granted. Friends, we take it for granted. We take our health for granted, right? So the things that we get, we take them for granted that are free. And health is one of those things. We abuse our bodies for decades and then eventually start breaking down, and then we take it serious. Find your anchor. So what is the one thing that aligns with you and what you want to become, and focus on that and expand from that. So it's like, maybe in the beginning it's you simply showing up to the gym, right? And that gets you going, right? The environment, and it makes you feel great. Focus on that area and then pivot and build from there, right? Skin in the game. So what that basically means is that we tend to be more invested in and less likely to quit something that we invest more in, right? So if we give a lot of money towards something, we're probably going to show up for that, right? I feel like that's how it is with relationships, right? If you invested a ton of time into somebody, it's probably a good chance you're not just gonna let that go super easy because you put so much time into it, right? You're invested in it. Quit tomorrow. So I think this is a very good mindset to have. Things get tough, right? And it's very, very easy to just be like, just do it tomorrow. I don't feel like going today, right? I don't want to do this anymore. Give it one more day, right? Quit tomorrow. You may not feel the same way tomorrow, and it's a good chance you probably won't. And very rarely do I ever hear somebody say, I didn't feel like coming in, and then by the end of the workout, they say, I wish I didn't come, right? They normally feel great that they still showed up anyways, even though despite they didn't want to. And then the last piece, this is a Bruce Lee quote: empty your mind, be formless, shapeless like water. If you put water into a cup, it becomes the cup. If you put water into a bottle, it becomes a bottle. If you put it in a teapot, it becomes a teapot. Now water can flow and it can crash. Be water, my friend. And so how I interpret that is, when it comes to nutrition and fitness standpoint, is a lot of times going back to dieting, right? That dieting mindset. We tend to get this like one track mind. It's very black and white. And when it comes to health and fitness, a lot of times it's a lot of gray areas, right? Because there's a lot of things you don't have control over, right? Like if you have kids, if you have a spouse, you have a job, a business, or whatever, it's gonna be those things that kind of get in the way, right? And so it's basically don't develop that all or none mentality where it's like, I either can do all of this like this, and if I can't do it like that, then I'm not doing anything. You can still do something, right? It's being able to adapt, right? It's understanding that health is one of those adaptable things, right? Your body's it's not gonna always be the same, right? You're not gonna be the same way you were at 18 that you are at 35, right? But you can still do something, right? You can still build on that, right? And so it's understanding that life is gonna be life, right? And it's gonna force you to have to adjust and change and do different things. And it's just being able to be adaptable, right? And not get so stuck on it has to be this exact way because of something I read or this belief that I'm holding on to that is supposed to look this specific way. And social media does a horrible job because people are trying to sell you things, right? And it's hard to sell something that basically doesn't necessarily have a concrete answer, right? So that's where a lot of the fighting comes from. This has to be the way. This is the answer. Science says this. So, and it's not to say that science doesn't matter, because it does. Obviously, we want to make the most best informed decisions, but it's understanding that it's also another side of it, right? And we live in the real world, right? And we don't live in a lab. So everything is not going to always apply the exact same way to everybody, and it's always going to be some adjustment that has to take place. So if you have any questions, you can reach out to me. If I was doing this in person, I would take questions hourly from everybody in front of me. But if you do have any questions, you can reach out. But that is the POWERU Nutrition System. I'm Coach Wendell. Thanks for listening.